January 28th, 1986. That date is seared into the world's shared memory. A Y-shaped cloud of smoke hanging in the Florida sky. A national tragedy. The story we were told was that it was an explosion. We were told it happened instantly. There was comfort in the belief that the 7 astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger never knew what hit them, that they perished in a flash of fire before fear could even register. It was a tragedy, certainly, but the narrative we were sold was a fabrication. What if I told you that the Challenger didn't actually explode? What if I told you that the crew cabin survived the breakup, largely whole? And the most haunting part, classified NASA documents reveal that the astronauts weren't just alive after the fireball. They were awake, they were conscious, and they were fighting for their lives during a fall that lasted 2 minutes and 45 seconds. We are cracking open the files NASA kept in the dark. We're going to expose the chilling discoveries made by recovery teams, items that were quietly classified. This is the story of the launch that should never have happened and the silence that cloaked the terrifying truth. The night before, to understand disaster, we have to turn the clock back to the night prior. The pressure was crushing. The launch had already faced multiple delays, and NASA was desperate to get the bird in the air. Nature, however, had different plans. The solid rocket boosters, those massive white rockets on the side, were sealed with large rubber rings known as O-rings. Picture them like the gasket on a pressure cooker. Their function is to keep superheated gas burning at 5,800 degrees trapped inside the rocket. But the engineers who built them, a team from Morton Thiokol, held an emergency teleconference that night. They were terrified. They knew a secret. In freezing weather, the rubber stiffened. It wouldn't seal correctly. It was like trying to use a frozen garden hose as a gasket. They predicted that if the temperature dipped below 53 degrees, the O-rings would fail. On the morning of the launch, it was 26 degrees. The engineers pleaded. One of them, Roger Boisterly, argued, "We must delay." But NASA managers, under immense pressure, pushed back. They infamously told the engineers to take off their engineering hats and put on their management hats. The warning was overruled. The launch was a go. The launch 11:38 a.m. Challenger clears the tower. To the cheering crowd on the ground, it looked like a flawless launch. But the camera doesn't lie. Just 0.678 seconds after liftoff, a lens zoomed in on the right solid rocket booster. A puff of dark gray smoke appeared. It was the O-ring. The cold rubber had failed to seal, exactly as predicted. For a split second, a jet of fire shot out like a blowtorch. Then, miraculously, the seal seemed to fix itself. Burnt rocket fuel and aluminum slag plugged the gap. For the next minute, the flight appeared perfectly normal. Inside the cabin, Commander Dick Scobie and pilot Michael Smith were running the show. Around 70 seconds in, Smith confirmed everything looked good. The ground controller gave the call. "Challenger, go with throttle up." Scobie's voice came back calm and clear. "Roger, go with throttle up." Those were the last words the public ever heard because at that exact moment, the temporary plug failed. The flame re-emerged, burning through the giant orange external fuel tank. At 73 seconds, the hydrogen fuel was unleashed. In less than a second, the entire vehicle was engulfed in a massive, chaotic fireball. The reality versus. The narrative here is where the narrative we were sold diverges from reality. The media and NASA repeated the word explosion over and over. It created the impression of a sudden, violent, and instantaneous event. The nation was led to believe the astronauts were vaporized and knew nothing. But investigators discovered this was completely false. The Challenger didn't explode. It disintegrated. The aerodynamic forces ripped the wings off, but the crew cabin, the reinforced module where the astronauts sat, was built to be incredibly tough, and it was. It broke free from the disintegrating orbiter hull. The cabin continued to travel upwards for another 25 seconds, reaching a peak altitude of about 65,000 feet. The cabin was not on fire. It was not breached. The crew was subjected to G-forces between 12 and 20 Gs. This is severe, but not instantly fatal. Then they were falling in near silence. The crew was alive. They were conscious. The evidence 6 weeks later. A sonar ship found the cabin in about 100 feet of water. It was largely in one piece. And inside, the recovery team found the remains of the 7 astronauts still strapped in their seats. But the most chilling piece of evidence was what they found on the astronauts themselves. Each astronaut was equipped with a personal egress air pack, or PEP. Think of it as a small emergency oxygen tank. To turn it on, an astronaut had to manually pull a lever on the pack behind their seat. It was a deliberate, conscious action. Here is the disturbing part. Investigators found that 3 of them had been manually activated. Let that sink in. Pilot Michael Smith's pack was on. Ellison Onizuka's pack was on. And a third, unidentified pack was on. These astronauts realized the air was unbreathable and took steps to survive. They were alive. They were aware. If the active air packs prove they were alive, the next question is, what were they doing? They weren't just sitting there. Because of the state of the remains, it was impossible to tell if Commander Dick Scobie's pack was on. But investigators believe he was the 3rd person with an active pack. Why? Because he was likely trying to fly the crippled cabin. The technical data tells the full story. Even as the electrical systems failed and the cabin began its long arc back toward the ocean, the crew was trying to save themselves. They were no longer pilots. They were passengers on a 2.5-minute fall. They endured a fall that ended in a 200 miles per hour impact with a hard, unforgiving surface of the ocean. The cover-up, so why did NASA hide this? Why push the instant story when they knew the truth was so much worse? The answer is complicated. First, the families. Dr. Joseph Kerwin, who wrote the official report on the cause of passing, stated the crew may have been unaware of the events. He carefully chose the word may. It was a small mercy offered to the grieving families. The truth he knew was far less certain and far more terrible. But there was another reason. The Space Shuttle was a symbol of American dominance and a massive multi-billion-dollar project. The instant story supported the idea of a noble warrior's end. The real story of conscious astronauts struggling in a helpless, falling cabin suggested terror. Worst of all, it suggested the shuttle was a trap. That truth would have been devastating to NASA's public image. NASA's cover-up wasn't just about the crew's final moments. It was institutional. They had data showing O-ring erosion from previous flights. They knew it was a Criticality 1 failure, meaning loss of vehicle and crew, and they still kept launching. This was finally exposed by the Rogers Commission. It was the famous physicist Richard Feynman who broke the story open. In a legendary public hearing, he cut through the bureaucratic double talk. He took a piece of the O-ring material, dunked it in a glass of ice water, and showed the world how it became stiff and failed. He revealed the simple, fatal flaw that NASA had ignored. Conclusion: at the end of the day, the question isn't just what happened, but why the story was controlled. Was NASA protecting the families or protecting its own reputation? The 7 astronauts, Scobie, Smith, Onizuka, Resnick, McNair, Jarvis, and McAuliffe, became national heroes. But their heroism wasn't in an instant flash. It was in their fight to survive against impossible odds. For more stories they don't want you to know, make sure to like and subscribe. I'd love to hear what you think about this, so drop a comment below. If you enjoyed our conversation today, please share this video and subscribe to help the channel grow. Every bit of support counts,